guys? Welcome back to the Fitness for Life podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Lohr, and I'm here with Jeff Dalzell. Jeff is a fitness and nutrition coach out of New Hampshire. He's been doing this, much like me, for about 5 years. Jeff, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited.
Absolutely. So Jeff, typically what I have people do is talk me through. You've been in the coaching world for about 5 years, but talk me through like where you got started on your fitness journey, because everybody has a different story when it comes to that. And I think it's important for people to hear, that everybody does have something a little different. A lot of people are athletes. Some people have some sort of transformation. So what was that for you?
Well, I was a high school athlete. I was a 3-sport athlete in high school. And then I was always fit in high school because I worked out and I played sports all the time. Right. And I enjoyed training in high school. I won weight training award, not like for how much I lifted, but for like effort and consistency sort of thing in high school. Nice. And then I got to college and nobody was like, hey, these are the times that you're lifting. And when you show up, this is your workout that you need to do. And here's 10 of your buddies to do it with you sort of thing. And so I never quite figured it out in college. And so college was a time of like in and out of exercise, and I catch a burst of energy and motivation, and I do the thing, and that continued out through college. And but I still ate like I did in high school, which was, Elio's pizza and frozen buffalo chicken wings and fries sort of thing. I alternated back and forth with that every night, and that was how I would eat. And then out of college, would still do this. So I did the fitness roller coaster thing all the time, where I'd be motivated and I do Insanity or P90X or something like that and get absolutely ripped to bits in 60 or 90 days because I'd eat just boiled chicken and kale and hate myself. And then I would look real good. I'd get the free t-shirt. I'd post I'd send in my after photos. And then 6 months later, I'd be like, all right, day one again. I rode that roller coaster for a while and I guess it was about 8 years, a little over 8 years ago now, was getting ready to get married, and same concept. I was like, all right, I'm going to get in shape for the wedding, and fully expecting to not be in shape 3 months after the wedding, but I was like, I'm going to do this. And it was a moment for me in the process of it where I was like, I just can't get myself to stick with it this time around. I don't know what it is. And I think there was something to the knowing that I was going to fail in terms of the long term that just made it feel pointless. And particularly in getting married, I'm like, how can I be a husband and, quote unquote, take care of my wife if I can't even take care of myself and figure this out? And so I was like, I'm going to try to do this a little differently. And so started doing things just a little bit differently, and it evolved over the course of time there. But that was January of 2016. So a little over 8 years ago. And that was the last before picture I took. I don't know if you caught the end of that, but that was the last before picture I took, was January of 2016. I don't know if I broke up there. Sorry.
Yeah, you did. That's okay.
Yeah. That was the last before picture I took was January of 2016. So I was a little over 8 years ago now.
Yeah. And for you talk about thinking of your wife and that being kind of the thing that spurred on a little bit of change there. What did you decide to change to make it last in that moment?
I think the constant refrain for a lot of coaches is sustainability. That's like what we preach, is like, hey, this has to be something that you can do for. And so what I changed was like, I can't have the plan be so perfect that if I miss one workout, then I'm screwed. For like, I would have to like start over the 90 days. Right. I missed one workout. I tried to make it up on Sunday. I couldn't make it up on Sunday. So then I'm trying to double up on Monday, and then it's all for naught. So I might as well start back at day one. And the all or nothing is the common thread, but it was just the idea that I had to be perfect. And it was perfection, or it was my real life. And it was more of kind of lowering the barrier to entry to what was considered success. So my workouts were 4 days a week instead of 6 days a week. They were 40 minutes instead of 70, 80, 90 minutes. My food was not all boiled chicken and kale and white fish and, you know, all the list of superfoods that you get when you Google like foods to eat to get ripped. You know, what did Chris Evans eat to look like Captain America? You know, that was what I was Googling back in, you know, the mid 2010s was those kinds of things. And so it was when I started to be like, okay, it's okay if this takes me a little bit longer, because I'm not getting married in 90 days. I'm getting married in 7 months. And I'm going to be married for the rest of my life. So what if I did this a little bit slower, and what would it look like for me to continue to do this like up to and beyond the wedding day? And the way that I started to do that was just kind of lowering the barrier to entry for what was considered success, instead of having to do what felt unattainable and was unattainable to do for longer than a few weeks.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think most people, or a lot of people, have this idea that to have a really high rate of success within their fitness, like they need to be doing, 5-day-a-week workouts, or, need to be running like crazy, or they need to, be incredibly dialed in. And like, to some point, like if you want to be at the very highest level, like bodybuilder level, you do need that. But that's everything dialed to 11. For the average person to be fit, healthy, and and capable of enjoying yourself. I forget who, I don't know who exactly coined this like strategy, but I'm a big fan of the 3x52 approach. I last heard it come from Tony Gentlecore. I don't know if he came up with it. But kind of doing the three times a week for 52 weeks a year, right? A lot of room for missing a workout there. If it's only 3 times a week, you've got a lot of opportunity to make that up within the week. A lot of room for grace there, and it's not such a big deal if you were to miss a day completely. So I really appreciate that. That kind of perspective on something, is you saw more success when you actually toned things down a little bit.
And I think that's the case for almost everybody. And I think the standard is that in every other place, but we assign a weird standard to fitness. Like we think we need to do what the bodybuilders do in order to be successful, but we forget that bodybuilding's a sport. Right. And so like it would be, if I like to play basketball and I played a couple days a week, it would be ridiculous to compare myself to Kobe Bryant or LeBron James or Michael Jordan, who played it. It was their job. It was literally their job to play basketball all the time. It's like for parents, comparing myself to the fitness, the parent influencers online whose job it is to do fun things with their kids, record it and put it online, and they're getting paid by people. You know what I mean? Like it's we assign a different standard to what needs to be done, versus like I could be a pretty good ball player going out and hooping a couple 3 times a week for forever, but like the idea that if I miss one day of hooping that I'm gonna be nothing, that only matters if you're in the minutia of the top 1% of the 1% trying to be the best of all time. We don't necessarily need to do the perfect, but I think we assign, and then we do that with work or anything like that. Like if you missed it one thing at work, you wouldn't be like, all right, well I might as well just start a new career. Or if I offered you $10 million and you turned it down because it wasn't $1 billion, it's like, what are we talking about here? Like, I'm not saying that $10 million is $1 billion. $1 billion is better, sure, but like let's not skip past the fact that $10 million would change your life a lot, and you probably have a lot less headaches than trying to manage
Right.
$1 billion.
Yeah. Yeah, seriously. No, that's a great point. And it brings up, you talk about, not worrying so much about, the small mistakes or whether it's perfect or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that has kind of bled into social media culture.
Yeah.
Um, of just like, man, everybody has to be, everything has to be perfect. There's all these people who are
Yeah.
talking about like the optimal lifestyle. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, for some people that's great. For the Joe Rogans of the world who work out, twice a day,
Yeah.
and, their nutrition is dialed in, and there's plenty of other people like that, but
Yeah.
he's just a very vocal example of some
Mm-hmm.
of these things. But you know what I have plenty of thoughts on it, but I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on those upper like 1 to 2% things, such as, the ice baths and um the cold plunges and the red light therapy and all this
Yeah.
stuff that people are constantly talking about, that to me it just doesn't seem, most people don't have the building blocks in place to really tackle any of those things before they get like a regular exercise routine and sleep
Yeah.
and nutrition.
So this is like the ice bath and the red light therapy stuff. I make a lot of financial analogies. This is like me and you debating what the right asset allocation is for my Bitcoin portfolio when I have no savings account and I don't
Yeah,
even know how much is in my checking account. Right?
right.
Like I'm not saying that that's, and I don't know anything about Bitcoin, but I also don't need to in order to, to be financially successful. Like you don't need that top, like you could, and I'm not saying that there's no value whatsoever there, but that's majoring in the minors like we chatted about before we started. It's like you're focusing on the wrong thing. There's a guy named Ramit Sethi who wrote a book called "I Will Teach You to Be Rich." He's got a website. He's got a Netflix show. I don't know if you've heard of him, but
I think so. Yeah.
his phrasing is, you talk about the big rocks in your life when he's talking about your financials. Like worry about $30,000 decisions and not $3 decisions. Like a lot of financial people will be like, stop buying coffee, and it's like, well, listen, I'm not saying that not buying coffee wouldn't maybe help your financial situation. If you're buying a $7 Starbucks latte every day, maybe you
Sure.
could use that money. You know what I mean? But like that's a $7 decision versus like I don't save any money or my credit score is terrible, so I get a horrible interest rate on my mortgage and that costs me 70 grand over the life of my mortgage. Like that's a more important decision and area to focus than is the little minutia piece. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have value, but if you're not at least somewhat aware of how much food you're eating, I don't know why I just got a thumbs up there, and that was wild. If you're not at least somewhat aware of how much food you're eating, if you're not building your meals around some protein and some fruits and some vegetables, if you're not walking most days, if you're not sleeping 7-9 hours a night, if you're not strength training, then no amount of cold plunges, green powders, red light therapies, saunas, even things like saunas who have a ton, I mean, none of those things is going to dramatically change your life if you're not doing those other things. And we oftentimes feel the other things are sexier because they're like
Yeah.
they're marketing, oh, take this and you will get X, right? It's if this and that. And it's not sexy marketing to just do the boring stuff
Yeah.
over and over again for a long period of time. But there's a reason why it's boring and it's worked forever. It's because it works forever and for everybody to do those things. And if you're trying to be the 1% of the 1%, then you can have those conversations. But like, don't spend $15,000 on a cold plunge bath for your house if you haven't slept 7 hours in the 2020s.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those things, and it gets me, pretty fired up when I see people spending, hundreds on supplements a year,
Yeah.
and they won't eat a vegetable. And I'm like,
Yeah.
listen, like in order for your body to get to improve its composition, you know, the adage "you are what you eat" has some value to it, right?
Mhm.
It's not necessarily, pound for pound exactly what it is, but you have to, eat like an adult. You have to have some protein. You have to, make sure you have carbs for energy. You have to make sure you're actually eating vegetables. We try so hard to get kids to eat their vegetables, and honestly, I think a lot of times, and I'm pointing the finger right back at myself sometimes, because this will be coming up with my son once he starts, eating real foods. It's like, hey, we gotta make sure we're eating our vegetables, because otherwise he'll probably see that and mimic
Yeah.
it. So we want to make sure that we're doing the right things so that he does.
We got to be
Um,
the adult in our own lives,
yeah,
like I think
exactly.
sometimes we're like we still act and we are still kids. Like I don't know, like my kids are maybe a little bit older than yours, but like 4 and 2 year olds, and it's just like they're little versions of me, just with no filter.
Yeah,
So we feel all the same things that they feel, but the only difference between kids and adults is like we have the ability to postpone immediate satisfaction, and that's what being a grown adult is. And so
yeah,
when you're not willing to do something hard because it's not what you want in the moment, you're acting like my 4-year-old toddler who had a tantrum because the grilled cheese sandwich that I made him was on an orange plate instead of on a blue plate. You know what I mean? Like that's the
yeah,
effective thing that you're doing when you're like, I don't want to eat this today. It's like,
right,
I mean, good for you. Like you don't want to go to work either. Sometimes
right.
we do things we don't want to do. Like that's part of being a grown person. And when you do it enough, even when you don't want to, then it becomes easier to do it when you don't want to, because it's just like, no, I do this regardless of how I feel.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a mindset shift that many people need to make. Is just recognizing that when it comes to, you know, like I would love to stay up
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, stay up till 2 in the morning every day if I knew I wasn't going to feel like crap.
Yeah.
I would love to have that extra, 2-3 hours with my wife. If I knew I wasn't gonna pay for it,
Yeah.
every day, and even more so day after day. Um, I'd love to, be able to eat, ice cream twice a day. That'd be great. But I know that if I want sustainable long-term health, I'm not going to feel good after a few weeks of doing that. Um, and it happens that fast. And I think, one of the things, I haven't gotten into it yet on this podcast, so I think it's worth getting into, is just the differences. So when we see people making those healthy choices sustainably over a long period of time, like when we're in our 20s, it's one thing, and it's easy to, say like, oh, I don't really know if they're making, a whole lot of healthy choices. But when people get into their 40s, their 50s, and so on, like there is a visible difference between people who are making those healthy choices and those who for years have not.
Yeah.
Um, and so, to those people, I say, like, one thing, it's, if you talk about, hey, 20 years ago was the best time to start making those choices, but tomorrow is, or today is the next best time. And that's the one thing so most of my clients are older. Most of my clients are in their 50s, 60s, and up. And I'm constantly re-educating around the idea of, like, no, listen, it doesn't have to get worse. Like, it does not have your life, your mobility, your pain, your strength, all that stuff, your balance, all that stuff does not have to get worse. Like, you can train eat, sleep, do all the things that lend itself to a much more robust lifestyle, even, years into your 70s and 80s. And I would argue even into your 90s, if you, haven't built that, that base before, like, there's never a bad time to start.
No, we're either getting better or worse every day. And again,
Right.
you come back to financials, like you see everybody's seen the graphics of like Dumb Dan and Smart Sally, who started. Smart Sally invested, starting at 20, and Dumb Dan waited until he was 30, and they invested, whatever. And you've seen these graphics where it's like, okay, well, obviously investing earlier is the better decision, but what the byproduct of those graphics is, after you're 30, you feel like an idiot. Right.
Right.
And so there's Smart Sally, who has been training her whole life. And then there's Dumb Dan, who hasn't been. And then you're like, well, I'm Dumb Dan. So what's the point? I'll never catch up to Smart Sally. Well, the conversation is, well, it's not just I'm not growing, I'm actively getting worse.
Yeah.
Especially after 50, when we start to lose our muscle and we start to lose our power and our balance and all of these things. And you see it. Like I have clients who are older. My parents are not old by any stretch of the imagination. They're in their early 60s, but we have small kids. And so they're like, we have to chase our grandkids around, and they want to be able to do that. They want to be able to lift my kids up above their heads and do all this kind of stuff. And it's like, listen, that's hard if you're not taking care of yourself to get down on the floor. And you see the difference between people who have and people who haven't. But it's not too late to start, but just punting on the whole thing because you didn't start too early is a really good way to just give up on the rest of your life.
True.
And there is all the evidence in the world that you can make significant changes at whatever age you are, particularly in terms of holding on to muscle but what that leads to is quality of life. That there's, just because you didn't start when you wanted to start doesn't mean, like, I didn't start. You and I both talked about this. We've been doing it for 5 years. This is a second career for me. I was a teacher for 5 years. And there's moments for me where I'm like, I could have not gone to college and started training at 18 years old, and I'd be at year 14 right now. And I'd be way further along in my career. However, that doesn't mean that just because if I didn't get it exactly right at the very beginning, like, that puts a lot of pressure on you as an 18-year-old to have your life figured out, when, like, most people don't. They just don't. So it's just like, just do it. Do the thing, and something is going to be better than nothing. You're either getting 1% better or 1% worse every day. And it's like leaving your money in a savings account. You're losing money. If you just leave your money under the mattress, you're losing money to inflation. If you're not doing anything, you're getting worse because the world is passing you by. So you gotta be actively fighting against it in order to live the life that you want to live, beyond just the, all right, I retire at 65, I travel the world for 5 years, and then I'm in an assisted living home for the next 15.
Yeah. No, and that's excuse me. And that's one of the things, like, really what got me started with working with this population, of people in their 50s and up, was watching my grandfather, and watching his decline very quickly, due to diabetes, congestive heart failure, him being, and the biggest thing was, like, just his obesity. He was, significantly overweight, needed to lose probably close to 100 pounds. Pretty much all of his health disparities probably would have gone away with, that kind of weight loss. And he was on 20 medications by the end of everything, and so, but what people don't understand is how quickly those changes can be made. If I would have known what I know now and would have had the chance to work with him, like, I think things could have turned out very differently. Excuse me. Because I have clients now, and we'll work together for 6, 7, 8 weeks, and get them off of medication.
Yeah.
And it's it happens that quickly for some people.
Yeah.
Is like just filling one or two buckets that they've been missing for years can really drastically change the way that someone is feeling, and the way that their body is responding. Clients going off diabetes medications within 2 to 3 months, like even without making a whole lot of changes other than, all right, let's eat a little bit more protein, let's get you on a regular, like 3 times a week workout schedule, and let's decrease your wine intake. Like 3 changes, pretty simple. Didn't even eliminate wine, just decreased it. And those things just happen very quickly. And this is for somebody in their 60s. That now it's like, okay, the outlook of someone who's on a medication for 10, 20, 30 plus years, not very good in terms of additional side effects. But the outlook of somebody who's on something for a couple years or even a couple months and decides to make the change and is able to, make that correction quickly is massive, and that's, I think, the last thing I really want to cover. We're getting close to our time here. One of the things that I see, and I try and encourage people, is like, hey, you don't have to get to rock bottom before making a change, right? A lot of people will wait until they have this like rock bottom moment of like, oh dang, I like am at the hospital, or I had to get passed out for some reason, or something scary that's like, oh, I could have died. Have to wait for that moment to make a change. And I think a lot of people kind of, because health doesn't really rear its head for the effects of poor management of health doesn't really rear its head for dramatically for 5, 10, or even 20 plus years. It's difficult to show them like, hey, like what you're doing is really gonna have a negative effect. And so it's hard for people to see like, oh yeah, no, I'm good, like I'm gonna just do my thing and then go off. So what would you say to people who are waiting for that uh-oh moment?
I mean, I think it comes back to the conversation of cost, right? So you're going to pay the cost at some point. Like the bill comes due, and it's cheaper to pay it now. So again, I hate to use a gajillion financial things, but there's just so many parallels. The idea of like, do I do a Roth IRA? Like, you're going to pay your taxes on it up front, but then you're not going to pay them down the road. So there's like a little bit of cost now, but for a lot of upside on the other side of it. The idea of, and you get to choose the cost, right? So that's the thing that I think people have a hard time with. And you get to choose the end goal. You get to choose what you're building toward. And so the idea of like, we think of fit as the bodybuilder, right? As I got to have a 6-pack, and it has to look a certain way. If you Google fit man over 50, right, you're going to see people ripped and jacked out of their minds. Most of them are photoshopped. Some of them are on steroids, right? Like, it's not necessarily what does fit look like, right? And so you get to choose the cost, and you also get to choose the upside of it, which is, I'm going to pay the cost now of like, I don't really want to work out. Working out is hard for me. It's a challenge. It is hard, right? Like, we have to own the reality that like being consistent, like, I think a lot of fitness people downplay the difficulties of training, being consistent, sacrifice. Like, there's a reason why we're obese, It's because that's easier. It's more fun. It's hard to do the other, you know what I mean? So we have to recognize that it's challenging, but you choose your hard. So I can do the hard now of like saying no to some things that I want to do, not everything, but some things that I want to do, and doing some things that I don't want to do for the sake that I'm going to have the result that I want to have, whatever that is. And you get to choose your stopping point. Now, the hard part about this is we're toddlers at heart, which is I want what I want when I want it, and I don't want what I don't want to do. And so we have to be the adults in our own lives and see the long-term vision and be willing to pay the cost for what it is that we're hoping for. But you can't be upset about the results you don't get from the work that you don't do. So if you're not going to do the hard work, then you can't be upset that you're where you are. It's the natural repercussions of the decisions that you made. Now that's your choice, right? If you're like, I'm not going to live forever, so I might as well do what I want to do now and live it up and YOLO and the whole thing. I'm going to rip it up and party and eat what I want. That's fine, because that's your upside. The cost is your longevity, maybe how you feel about how you look, your relationships with all, you know what I mean? That's your cost. And if that's the cost you're willing to pay, that's fine. And you have to be okay with the upside of it, right? The consequence, like the bill comes due. And so you choose your cost, you choose your hard, whatever you decide it to be. That's your choice. That's your freedom, is to choose what it is that you want to do and what you want out of it. But if you say you want something, you have to be willing to do what it takes to get to that. If you want to look like Zac Efron in Baywatch, then you have to be willing to do what he did in Baywatch. And not a lot of people are willing to do that. I'm not willing to do that. So, and I'm not.
Even
and
he has mentioned
he's not willing to do it anymore.
He's not willing to do it again.
No, because it's so miserable. But we think that, I can just get that by like dabbling my foot in it. And to go back to you're not going to be the greatest basketball player, and I'm not a big basketball, you're not going to be the greatest basketball player of all time if you're not in the gym. Like Kobe talked about, like my first session of the day was 4 to 6, and then I went again from 8 to 10, and then from 12 to 2. He worked out like 7 times a day, and that's how he became as good as he was. And so that was his cost. But you're not going to like accidentally make your way into that, just like you're not going to accidentally become a gazillionaire. Like there's a rare occasion where that happens. Like there's a very, like you hit the lottery or whatever, but that's not a game plan. That's not a strategy. You can't build your life on, I'm going to hit the lottery and hit the genetic lottery and, I can just eat whatever I want to. And we all have that friend who's like eats like trash and doesn't work out and is still fit, but they're the exception. They're not the rule. And those people are oftentimes the ones out there peddling the cold plunges and the greens powder and like, this is what did it. And it's not the fact that they were just born with great genetics, and that's a big part of it. So we have to choose what our heart is and be okay with the consequences of that, both good and bad. Like, I'm going to pay this, and so the most I'm going to get on the upside is here, right? If I only work out 3 times a week, that's not a bad thing. That's a great thing. But if I work out 3 times a week, I'm not going to look like the bodybuilders. I'm just not going to. Like, you can't look like that by doing only that. Now, that's not a bad thing, because there's a lifestyle factor of it. I got 3 kids. I'm not going to go to the gym 6 days a week for 90 minutes and eat all of my food out of Tupperwares, because that's not my fit life right now. That's not the life that I want to live. I want to do the whatever is required of me to be able to keep up with my kids. That's my choice right now. And your choice, if you're 22 and you got nothing going on and you want to be ripped, then go for it. If you're 60 and you're like, I want to run a marathon. I got a 60-year-old client who's like, I want to run a half marathon. It's like, I don't, but good for you. Let's do it. You know what I mean? Like, but you have to be willing to do what it takes to get that. And so I think that we oftentimes miss the we don't count the cost for what it is that we're doing, but the bill comes due at some point.
Yeah, I think, you talk about, hey, the financial analogies are a great, they're a great way to think about it. And I think particularly the IRA analogy, because like saving for retirement, no one enjoys deferring that,
No.
that money that you could have right now to, hey, I'm going to save it so I can actually like live when I'm 70, 80 and so on. And I don't want to work a full schedule, right?
Yep.
Enjoys that, just putting that money away. But that it's the responsible thing to do because it's going to pay off later. And I think that's very similar with our health and our fitness, is like we have to take that mindset of like investing in your fitness is like investing in your retirement. It is it's something you defer the enjoyment for the long run, because you know that in 20, 30, 40 plus years, it's going to enable you to do the things that you want to do, because you did the things that you knew you had to do.
Well, even the short-term stuff is there too, with like people, like to take back to my story, right? Like the cost that I paid was I'm miserable for 90 days. The benefit I got was I was ripped at the end of it. Now, the problem was I wasn't willing to continue to pay that cost. And so then I went back to what I did. But you can be like, all right, listen, I want to feel how I want to feel at the beach with my kids this summer. That's a thing that you want to feel. Well, that means that in April, when we're recording this, you can't be eating like a teenager at night and staying up and binging Netflix. And you know what I mean? Like, you have to make some decisions. But if you get to the summer and you acted like a teenager all spring, you can't be like, oh man, here I am, another summer. It's like you made your bed and now you got to sleep in it. And so it's all a matter of like, it doesn't have to be 40 years from now. It could be like, oh, I made the decision to exercise today, therefore I feel better tomorrow. Or you talked about, I made the decision to go to bed tonight so that I felt like a real person tomorrow, or I didn't eat all this, like bunch of ice cream and feel like trash the next day. There is immediate benefit as well to it, as well as long-term benefit. Now, which is different from the financial side of things, because there's not a lot of immediate benefit. Doesn't mean that it's not difficult, but there is still upside in the short term to taking care of yourself. It is hard though, and we have to recognize that you choose your hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeff, I think we're approaching, where we want to be in terms of time. Is there anything that, we kind of touched on, or that maybe we didn't, that you want to add before we finish up here?
I mean, I don't want to go too on it, but the idea we chat about just this concept of the fit life is an interesting one when it comes to fitness journeys. And I had this conversation with a client the other day that I think is a good telling story with it, which is her relationship with exercise has always been about losing weight. Like since college, it's very similar to me. Like she has my story, but spread out over 14 years, basically. And her relationship with it has always been about losing weight. And she's now lost 35 pounds or something like that, which is great. But the biggest thing for her is the mental bandwidth to not really have to think about it when it becomes a part of your life. And she's not like constantly on the roller coaster of like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? It's like automating your finances when it just comes out of your paycheck and you're not thinking about it. You just do the thing. It's part of what you do. It's a natural thing. It's out of sight, out of mind. She exercises. It's what she's going to do. She had a really busy month. And so it's not like she lost a lot of weight in the month of March, but she's like, I still did all the things that I would do. And so she's thinking about, well, what do I do next? And she keeps thinking about like, oh, I need another fitness goal. Like, oh, I want to do a pull-up. And she's like, that doesn't really drive me. And I'm like, all right, what do you want to do? She's like, I'd love to garden. Fitness goals, fit life life is lived outside of the gym. It's outside of the gym. Like doing fitness allows you to play with your grandkids and for me to chase my kids around. So it's like, what do you want to do? I want to be able to garden and not worry about whether or not I'm going to be out of breath or tired or, hurt myself bending over
Right.
or whatever. And I want the mental bandwidth to be able to be like, I'm going to listen to a gardening podcast instead of listening to the same fitness podcast for the 50th time and not implement anything. So the idea behind this is, if you're listening to this, I would encourage you, like, do something with this. Like, don't be like a glutton for information. Like, if you haven't implemented something from this podcast that you've been listening to with Jackson, or if you've ever listened to me, if you haven't implemented something, don't listen to another episode. Like, don't read another post of mine. Don't, you know what I mean? Like, don't keep consuming until you do something. People ask me all the time, like, what books are you reading? And I'm like, I'm not reading a book right now. And it's not because I don't think reading books are valuable. I read fiction books, but I'm not reading like another business book right now, because I'm trying to execute on the last book I read. And until I execute on that, then another idea is just going to distract me from what I'm trying to do. So focus on one thing, do one thing that moves you a little bit closer, and then stack it, because it's really freeing to not have to think about this all the time.
No, I think that's a fantastic piece to end on. There's so much out there. If you've been, if you're in my Facebook group and you've been, seeing these videos come up for 4 months now, on a weekly basis, and that's as of this recording in April, which this will probably go live at least a month later, if not more. If you've been listening, and not implementing some of the things, there've been some killer stuff in this. If you go start to finish on this podcast, you will get everything you need to know. Honestly, more information than you would in an entire 12-week, paid session with me. So please implement the stuff that you're hearing. If you're struggling, if you're not, if you can't afford to hire a coach, like, this is the next best thing. Because really, I'm sure the same is true of Jeff. We're just here to help. And that's why we do this stuff, is we really want you guys, we want everyone to succeed. We want people to live healthier lives. We want people to be around for longer, to enjoy their lives more. That's what got us into this. And we hope that you hear this, and take action. So, Jeff, thank you so much for hopping on with me. It was a pleasure getting to chat with you. Where can people find you if they're looking for you?
Yeah, man, thanks. This is a lot of fun. On Instagram at Jeff Dalzell Fitness. By the time this goes live, my website will be live, so jeffdalzellfitness.com. Nice. Or I have a podcast as well, the Fit Parent Podcast, with Jeff Dalzell. I'll have to have Jan Jackson at some point. We'll give it a little bit of a breather so we don't talk about the same stuff and let you recover from your COVID there. But yeah, it was awesome to be on. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys have a great day. We'll see you next time. Here for just a second.